Hello, thank you everybody for coming. If we could get the... Hello, thank you all for coming. It was my father's a desire to have his memorial here. In March 2023, my father was told by the doctors he would not survive, and he had a different opinion. And they told him it was time to get his affairs in order, and he had a different opinion. But I did write our mayor and said my father would like to have his memorial service, if possible, in the gallery, the pictures on either side that meant so much to him. And the mayor said yes, and about a month later I got an email saying, when do you like the service? And I'm like, oh, he didn't die. So 2 years later, my father got 2 more years out of life beyond medical advice. With 17% of his heart working, he got 2 more years, and he passed away last week, but he knew we were going to be meeting here, and I was so grateful that the mayor graciously let us come here today. My father, one other story I'll tell about him, he always used to say that he was Dr. Sloan, but I always reminded him I wasn't the kind of doctor that helped people. So with that, thank you again for coming, and I'll pass the microphone to our mayor.
Thank you, Catherine. And you know, you never say no to Dr. Sloan, so he can have what he wants. But everybody, welcome and thank you for being here tonight. It's quite impressive to see as we celebrate this the life of Dr. Sloan. Now, probably many of you know him a lot better than I did, because I really started interacting with him once I became the police chief in 1995. So I didn't get a chance to interact with him as much as I would like to. But I did know that, you know, he was a very impressive figure. I'd like to refer to like a gentle giant. He was such a big man, but very, very gentle, and always seemed to be calm no matter what was happening. And I really, really liked working with him. Now, he dedicated his life to not only educating himself, but educating others. And to me, that's the most noble profession of all. I know we have a lot of teachers up here, and I've always said that teaching is a noble profession, and they impact the world, because when they impart knowledge and love and skills and experience to the young people, they change the world as those young people go out and make their mark in the world. And certainly Dr. Sloan contributed to that and did that, I'm sure, very well. So as I said, I didn't know him as much as most of you did in here, but I know that when we worked together with Frank Esposito, who was the mayor at the time, and so forth, and just a very, very good person who really, really enjoyed teaching, really enjoyed what he did. So I want to thank him for all he did for the city of Norwalk in the years that he was here, and the years after he left Norwalk, what he did for young people all across the state. And I want to introduce the next speaker, our Senate Majority Leader, Bob Duff. Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad I remember my name.
Sometimes I can't remember mine.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all here, and thanks for being out here for Dr. Sloan. Price, thanks for having us, gathering us all here, and to all of the grandchildren. It really is a pleasure to be able to say a few words about Dr. Sloan. So, My memory of Dr. Sloan is kind of broken into two different categories. One is as a student, and if you're a good student, you really shouldn't know who the superintendent of schools is. You should just kind of like know a name, and that's pretty much it. But Dr. Sloan was a different type of superintendent. He was somebody who really wanted to get to know students and wanted to make sure that he was doing the best that he could for students and supporting students. And that meant whether it was working with central office staff, teachers, administrators, whatever, just to get the best results out of students. And back in the 1980s, I graduated in the late 20th century. I like to say last century. My kid said that actually. And Norwalk at the time, and I believe we're back there again, but at the time, in the 80s, Norwalk was considered the best urban school district in the country. And that was a lot because of what Dr. Sloan did, our teachers and our administrators and others. But Norwalk had a really wonderful reputation under his leadership. And he took that very seriously. And he had a Board of Education at the time that worked very well with him. And it was a different Board of Ed because at the time you had your majority representation, your minority representation. And everybody worked together in a very bipartisan way to make sure and put schools and our kids first. But my experience with Dr. Sloan was really heightened my senior year of high school in 1989 when the beloved Mr. Dunlap, Lou Dunlap, if you remember the name, so many friends here that haven't seen in such a long time, when he retired. And most of us were devastated to lose Mr. Dunlap because he had been such an institution at Norwalk High School for such a long time. Now I'm going into my senior year of high school, and there's big changes happening, losing the principal. So Dr. Sloan put together these various groups to interview the next principal. So he had all these people come in, but he broke us up into various groups. So he had a parent group to interview the new principal, the potential principals, I think a teacher group, and there was a student group. And for whatever reason, he asked me to lead that student group to interview the new principal. Well, for some reason, a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds must have made a difference because we did some sort of like matrix or something on the class boards before Excel or anything else, and rated all the different people who were interviewing and everything else. And he came in and he kind of was showing us off. And the person who we chose ultimately became the principal of the high school. And we were all very, very proud about that. But it really showed the gift that teachers give to students. And I'm calling him a teacher because he is a teacher. And how that inspires, those acts inspire people for a lifetime. Because at that moment when he asked me to lead that group of other students who arguably probably had better grades than me, maybe better SAT scores than I did, maybe did more activities than I did, but he asked me to do that. And I just want to say it was such a gift to me that I always remember and I always will remember, and how it probably helped me to get to where I am today. So I thank Dr. Sloan for that. And for that gift of confidence that he gave me. And he actually even wrote a letter of recommendation for me for college. He asked to do that. I didn't ask him, he asked to do that. Think of how special that is for a superintendent to take an interest in a student, to say, I'd like to write you a letter of recommendation for college. I looked for it yesterday, I couldn't find it. I know I have it somewhere. But I will never forget him writing that, and Norma Wagner was his secretary at the time. Second part of life was that Ben Walker and I were friends. He was in high school with me. He was stepson of Dr. Sloan, and we went down and through our church, Norwalk United Methodist Church, was called the Appalachia Service Project. So it was a week of making homes warmer, safer, drier. And we would, before we went off down to West Virginia, wherever we went to, we would gather for breakfast at our church. And Dr. Sloan was there. Now imagine seeing your superintendent. It's hard enough seeing a teacher. Imagine seeing your superintendent there, like at 8 o'clock in the morning when, as a high school student, seeing you off. And I saw Dr. Sloan kind of as just a regular, normal kind of a person, a parent, if you will. And how really just involved he was in the community, and somebody who actually lived in Norwalk and was in the community every single day and took part in so many things and truly, truly cared about his community. So when he retired, I know I was devastated that he had left because he had done so much good for our community. But I know that based on the gallery here, through all the people who are here today to remember him, that he's had such a lasting legacy on so many of us. And that his leadership has literally spilled into many of us, and we've been inspired by him and his work. And that, again, when you're a teacher, you never know who you help. You never know what's going to happen with those kids once they leave you. But I certainly know it's not just me. I'm sure there are countless others who have been impacted in a positive way by Dr. Sloan, who he may not even know, but who have learned from him and been guided by him or benefited from all his work, that have now done some marvelous things in our community. So again, thank you for being here today. Thank you for organizing this. And I'm just so deeply honored to be able to say a few words on somebody who meant so much to me as a student of the Norwalk Public Schools. Thank you.
And he did check in. He often asked how Bobby Duff was.
Thank you. Next is Jim Connelly, representing Connecticut Superintendents. Jim.
Thanks, Senator. First of all, I come here more as a colleague and as a friend of Ralph's, but at the same time, we were all part of a group, and as Ralph, I know that Ralph helped write his own obituary, and he highlighted the important parts. And one of the most important parts was Mark Shedd. Mark Shedd was the Commissioner of Education here, but he intersected with Ralph in Philadelphia during some very difficult time, and I know in talking to Ralph, some of Ralph's passion, real passion for social justice came from that period in Philadelphia. And there are two other people here tonight who actually part of that Shedd crew. One is Steve Tracy. Steve was a superintendent here in Connecticut in many places, almost as many as me, I think. And Dr. Shedd brought him up here, and he worked with Dr. Shedd and then became the superintendent, I think, of Farmington, right?
New Milford.
Okay.
I was the assistant in Farmington, superintendent in Milford.
Okay.
In New Milford.
And then the other person is Mary Jo Kramer. Mary Jo also worked at the State Department of Ed then under Dr. Shedd, and was a colleague, as I was, with Ralph for many, many years. So I'm delighted that these are people that really come to what formed his really vision in education. My experience with Ralph was I was the neighboring superintendent in Bridgeport, and Ralph was superintendent here in Norwalk, in the most effective urban superintendency in the state. And there was also a third person that was very close to us, and that was Bill Papalo. Bill came out of that whole thing too, and he was a superintendent in Stamford. So that we really formed a bond, and I really want to talk, as the senator did about, and the mayor did, about Ralph really wanting to educate people. In my experience, along with the whole Shedd culture, the sense of collegiality that Ralph had with all of us was doesn't exist today. We wouldn't be, my experience with him more was with CAUSE, Connecticut Association of Urban Superintendents. That was formed by Jerry Tarazzi when he was mayor of New Haven, and then he became Commissioner of Education. So there's a whole culture. There's a whole culture of collegiality. And his feeling of meeting with us and me meeting with them is to support and learn from each other. And we would meet up at Choate Rosemary Hall monthly. You didn't dare miss that meeting. And we all said, we met there, it saved us all a psychiatric bill, because we were able, in a very, very candid way, to talk about the field, to attempt to grow with each other. And each of us had our own little specialties. Ralph's specialty was school finance. And I wish he was still here today. I could deal with you folks up there. But he represented, the superintendent statewide on the task force on school finance. And the Ed Enhancement Act came in during that time. ECS they played around with, but Ralph was our expert on that. And he wasn't there to just fill a chair. He was there to bring his knowledge and bring his work to that. During that time, my specialty was multicultural learners. And then both of us, our specialty really was at one point, and I see that Larry Cafero is going to go after. Also at that point, we were dealing, this is pre-Columbine, but we were starting to deal with some real violence among kids and what we could do about it. And Ralph really shared a lot, along with Tom Mooney, who was the board attorney at that point, shared for our whole group some things that have developed since that time. So, and there are many, many other things, but the whole point was Ralph's relationship was always growth. Personal growth with each other and professional growth with each other. And as we take a look at this polarized society we have today, you just reach out and say, where is Ralph? Where's Ralph? Because he was, there was no one felt embarrassed. Everything we did was confidential, but everything was to support each other, not to, I just can't say, I'm not one for hyperbole, but I've also said that Ralph was one of the best superintendents in my time in the state, without a doubt. And just my own personal thing, I came to Norwalk as interim 10 years ago. And Ralph had been gone now. Ralph had been gone for almost 20 years. But I still found when I got here, I still found some folks that had worked with him. And I still saw that camaraderie going on. One of the things I found, and Mayor isn't here now, there he is. I found when I got in here, right away, the other city officials came in to see me. I remember coming in here and Chief McCarthy was in here the next day. How can we work together? You know, it was just, I've never experienced this before. Next day it was your successor as police chief. And then he introduced me to a person that I still stay in touch with, Ashley Gonzalez. Ashley was and he worked with the kids in the school system. He became the deputy chief. And out of that, I'm not going to give credit to Ralph, but he then became the chief of police, chief of school police in Austin, Texas. And after that, he's now up in Brookline, Massachusetts, near where Ralph originated from, as chief of police in Brookline. So that was the kind of thing I found here in Norwalk, and I attribute that to really Ralph and the culture of really working together and staying together. And just two other things. In coming in here, Maura was here then. She was, and two of the people that I appointed while I was here, I'll take credit for. I was only here 4 months. But two of the people I appointed were Miller Thomas, who stayed 10 years. I think he's still here at the Concord. And I promoted Damian Lewis, who became your middle school state principal of the year this year. Damien, when I got here, was the assistant principal at Ponus Ridge. So for the little time I'm here, I'm proud that I carried on that legacy that Ralph had started here. But again, I'm delighted I was invited to speak, and I just want you to know that all of us, Connecticut really, not just the city of Norwalk, but the whole state of Connecticut is all the better for the many years that Ralph spent here. And I just want to thank you as a community he's been gone for over a quarter of a century. And it is still, his passing is a headline in the local paper, and it's a credit to that legacy that so many people are still here tonight. So again, thank you. And I guess, is Judge Genuario is next?
Let me just do something. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bob Genuario, he was running. Could we play Larry's message, if possible? Larry was in California with his kids and grandkids, and so he sent a video. This is always tricky to do, so I appreciate it.
Hello, everyone. Larry Cafero here. I'm so sorry I can't be with you in person to celebrate Ralph's life and career, but I'm out of state for a while on a previous commitment. I first met Ralph Sloan when I was 28 years old. I just got elected to the Norwalk Board of Education, where I served for 6 years under his leadership. I was 28 years old, as I said, and didn't know much of anything. And thanks to the wisdom and patience and teaching ability of Ralph Sloan, I learned so very much and got to watch the master firsthand. I marveled at the way he dealt with every person and personality imaginable. The teachers, fellow administrators, political leaders, community leaders. He truly was a master. That tall figure, that booming voice. He commanded a room. He was an amazing public speaker, but most of all, he was a compassionate, visionary leader who was a transformative, I should say, leader of the city of Norwalk. Norwalk Public Schools thrived and met new heights under the leadership of Ralph Sloan. I'm privileged I got to witness it. I'm privileged that my 3 children attended Norwalk Public Schools during his tenure. You know, when they write the book about Norwalk, as they continue to do for all these, 300 years, Ralph Sloan's going to have a special chapter. He truly made the city we live in a much better place. He'll be missed by all. Rest in peace, Ralph. God bless you. Thank you for letting me share this.
Larry told me a quick story that when they were staying in a hotel room and they had just switched over from real keys to card keys, and my dad was fumbling in the door and didn't know what to do with the card key, and Larry took it out of his hand and swiped it, opened the door, and he goes, "Way to go, Harvard." Susan?
Yep. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you for doing the video.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, new friends and old friends, particularly our esteemed mayor, our superintendent of schools, our majority leader, Bob Duff, our former mayor, Alex Knopp, and in particular, Katie. I call her Katie, and her 3 children who are Ralph's grandchildren. I want them to just raise a hand for a second. Could you do that? First of all, you're so darn handsome, and I really am so thrilled to be with all of you today. I am Susan Weinburger, and I worked for the entire 15 years of Ralph Sloan's tenure here in Norwalk on this floor, so I'm going to tell you a few little stories. Dr. Ralph Edward Sloan, Jr. arrived in Norwalk from Simsbury as our superintendent of schools in 1983. He and his family moved into 1 East Avenue. That meant that if there was a snowstorm, he could walk to work. Soon after, he invited me to be his first and only public affairs officer. My actual contractual title was the Assistant to the Superintendent for Public Relations. We were a mighty team in that small office in a rundown building on East Avenue. His loyal administrative assistant, Norma Wagner, may her soul rest in peace. Secretary Betty Fumo, may her soul rest in peace. Ralph, me, and later, Lisa Palladino. And thank you, Lisa, for being with us this evening. Raise a hand. Much has been written about the qualities of an outstanding superintendent. Just do a Google search. But when you do, you will continually be redirected because you see it's in this city where you will find the man that exemplifies all the attributes of the best of the best. Aspiring superintendents just need to learn about Dr. Ralph E. Sloan if they want to succeed. A recipe for greatness. Now, Norman and I have 5 grandchildren and now a great-grandchild, and they often teach us words that we really never knew. If they were here today, they would teach us, Ralph is the goat. Allow me to state just a few things, a few qualities of Ralph Sloan. Exceptional leader, excelled in decision-making and communication skills. He endeared himself to teachers, administrators, parents, and most importantly, to the students. They were his priority. Strange as it may seem, Ralph Sloan, who was actually liked by the union leaders. He was actually liked by the teachers' union. I see some nods over there, my friends. He was liked by the administrators' union, paraprofessionals, and maybe, just maybe, if we're lucky, by John Mosby, head of the custodial union. A tireless activist and pain in the you-know-what, I will always believe that Mr. Mosby really respected Ralph. And believe it or not, his open and transparent attitude made him a friend of the media. Senior education writer Francis X. Fay would call him at midnight for a story, and Ralph would take the call. I guess he neglected you and your brother Jonathan. We won't talk about that, Katie. At Christmas time, Ralph and I would take the media to lunch to thank them for their coverage. Sometimes it was good coverage, sometimes it wasn't good coverage, but Ralph knew how to nurture, and he was a visionary, and he was always available and accessible. Ralph was respected, if not adored, by parents. They were among his top priorities. The stories are too numerous to recall this evening, but maybe just one will illustrate this lesson. On January 23rd, 1987, the third snowstorm in less than a week left another 6 inches on the ground after falling for 3 hours during the morning commute. There were several traffic tie-ups and 1 death. Dr. Sloan closed schools at 1 p.m., but parents, worried about their children, flooded the school switchboard with calls. The superintendent relieved the switchboard operator, took over himself to the surprise of the callers, and he provided precise answers on the student location to every parent. One of the most horrific events during Ralph's tenure was the tragic rape and murder of 11-year-old Ponus Ridge Middle School student Catherine Marie Flynn in 1986 in the woods as she walked home from school. The event rocked this world and that of the community. It irrevocably changed the lives of one family and caught us all in the orbit. Parents were fearful for the lives of their children. Within minutes of the crime, reporters from national television stations, CBS, NBC, and ABC were at our doorstep. Ralph and I spent the next 3 weeks at the school reporting daily on school attendance, assuring families that they could feel safe and encourage them to send their children to school. I actually slept on the floor in my office right here on this level for 4 nights in order to address the media. But that was what Ralph Sloan taught me. Stop everything, always be there for the moment, Regardless of the situation, you lead the way. And lest I leave this tragic story as is, the accused murderer was arrested decades later on June 14th, 2019, and awaits trial. Ralph Sloan was a superb negotiator. Just ask the members of the Board of Estimate with whom he had to work every day. In fact, he was such a school finance maven, as Jim mentioned, that he taught the graduate school in finance at the University of Bridgeport for would-be superintendents. Ralph brought consensus. He built a team that understood the expectations and goals. His staff was fiercely loyal. Count me among them. If you want to excel as a superintendent, here are just some of the things that Ralph did while he was in Norwalk. He visited all the schools and classes often. He was a superb listener. Retired teacher Robert Klein. Raise a hand, Robert. I like to acknowledge people. Robert Klein shared with me that Dr. Sloan visited his class one day, and 2 days later, Bob received a handwritten note in the mail thanking him for his nice visit and pointing out in particular what he enjoyed about the visit. And it was signed simply, Ralph. Is that the story you told me the other day in the parking lot?
Three of them.
Well, wait a minute. I'm on stage right now, okay? So here's what else Ralph Sloan did. He took all of his new hires on a bus tour and gave them a lesson in the history of Norwalk. Ralph Sloan succeeded in recognizing almost every teacher by their first name. Convocation every fall was a remarkable experience. He set out to launch a new year by motivating and making every teacher proud of their profession. One year, he actually sent me on the train to New York City to rent the soon-to-be-released film, which I still love, Stand and Deliver by Jaime Escalante. I'm so glad you came tonight to agree with me. To show at Convocation. It was just inspirational. He was smart, he was funny, and he was compassionate. And if you think this is all my imagination, those are some tributes from many who have touched and been inspired by Ralph Sloan. And then there was me. Ralph was my mentor. He motivated me, inspired me, and challenged me to be all that I could be. And most important, Ralph Sloan believed in me. At the time, we had a robust adopt-a-school program, which Jim and I were talking about the other night, which I had created locally with local corporations. One day, I reported to Ralph that some kids in the classrooms that I was visiting seemed disconnected, isolated, lonely, and lacking in a sense of belonging. And Ralph said, you know, Susan, I think the business community that's connected with our adopt-a-school program could help. And then he looked at me with a twinkle in his eye and said, make it happen. Nothing like a Ralph Sloan challenge. And so I did. And Norwalk became the home to the first and oldest school-based mentoring program in America. It will celebrate 40 years in 2026. Renowned across the world, I may have designed and implemented and became a mentoring consultant for the past 27 years to replicate it. But it would never, ever have happened without the guidance, support, love, and faith of Dr. Ralph E. Sloan. Dear Ralph, may you continue to teach, row, guide, and mentor in heaven. God bless you. Bob Genuario is here. Bob, I see you. May I introduce you? Is that okay, Katie? All right. Hi, Bob.
Hi.
Hi.
How's everybody doing? Good. I want to thank Ralph's family for inviting me to speak here today. You know, I don't think I've addressed this many people in Norwalk City Hall in about 20 years, so I'm a little out of practice, but looking around and seeing some familiar faces, Phyllis and others, I'm reminded of the closing scene in Remember the Titans, where everybody gets back together and the narrator says, and we got back together many years later because Gary had died. Well, Gary was their leader, and Ralph was our leader. And we're back together again to remember Ralph. I got on the Norwalk Board of Education about 1981, and I remember it well. It was really my first foray into public service. But in 1981, until Ralph came, the system was in a bit of disarray. We had a superintendent. I hope I won't hurt anybody's feelings when I say I liked him personally, but he did not have the confidence of the educational community. He certainly didn't have the confidence of the teaching community. And the result was that the system just wasn't functioning. We needed an educational leader. I remember like it was yesterday, the day I met Ralph Sloan. The board, who divided amongst Republicans and Democrats, I used to say, I still say, you couldn't tell who was a Republican and who was a Democrat if you didn't have a scorecard. We all got together, but we all knew that we needed an educational leader. That was the catchphrase. We wanted an educational leader. We were interviewing with national search. We had a sophisticated searcher heading up the process, and we had done a number of interviews that were particularly non-eventful. And in walks Ralph Sloan. He was tall, good-looking, articulate, and I think a little bit preppy. But it was clear that he wanted to lead a diverse school system. It soon became clear that he brought more to the table than those superficial characteristics of being tall. I like to say being tall is a superficial characteristic. I like to say it about being good looking too, but we won't even get into that. But he had a passion about education, about kids, about the promise that public education held for children. He had a remarkable background. He was exceedingly young for a superintendent candidate in those days. He was about 40 years old. He was probably the youngest of the candidates that we interviewed. But he had a freshness about him. He was particularly proud of his experience in Philadelphia, where he had helped the superintendent of schools in Philadelphia bridge some very, very controversial issues in a very, very difficult time. He was there in the 70s, and I'm sure we all remember the 70s. It was a tough time, and he was in the center of it. He had a remarkable tenure in the Simsbury school system, a very noteworthy school system in terms of academic achievement. But it was clear that he wanted Simsbury's great school system, suburban school system. He wanted to be in a system that had a more diverse population of kids. One of the other things I remember about Ralph is that he was educated in the traditional liberal arts sense. He had a broad scope of knowledge about all sorts of things. You could talk to him about English literature, you could talk to him about history, you could talk to him about politics, you could talk to him about science. He just had a broad background, and he was always interested in so many different types of things. But he understood that a great school system like Norwalk required a complex web of relationships between administration, teachers, support staff, parents, and other affiliates. One of his greatest tools in weaving that web was that he was a great listener. He established personal relationships, and I'm sure many of you who have spoken before me have mentioned this. He established personal relationships with all the people employed by the school system. He was one who would say, you can't be pro-education and anti-teacher. I don't know if that was his quote, but originally, but he felt it and he believed it, but he believed it in a broader sense. You can't be pro-education and be anti-educational personnel. He knew the names not only of all the teachers, I read some other folks had said that, but he also knew the names of paraprofessionals, custodians, food service workers. He really was in and about the Norwalk school system, and he took a very personal interest in the individuals who made that system run. I remember a lot of conversations with Ralph when I was on the board, and they would start out something like this. We'd be talking about an issue, something dealing with parents, and rather than Ralph kind of spewing out his opinion, he would say, you know, I was at a parents' meeting the other night, and so-and-so said this. And you know, if you think about it, that may impact this issue like that. And it wasn't just that he was trying to manipulate people and make up stories. He actually had been at the parents' meeting, and somebody actually had said that, and he brought that back to the board. And it wasn't just at a parents' meeting. I was talking to the leadership of the union, and you know, I know you feel this way, but the teachers have a point here. They suggested this, and it went on and on. He was the most passionate guy about the food service workers I think I ever met. I mean, he just knew. Frank would come in. He had countless meetings with Frank, who was running our food services department at that point in time. I mean, it was just a wonderful personal touch, and he always conveyed their point of view. I always conveyed their point of view objectively and sincerely, and in a way that would help craft policy and make the Norwalk public schools better. There are a couple of other things that I remember about Ralph and what he liked about education. I remember him saying, you know, one of the reasons education is exciting is because every September, or nowadays it might be August, you get to start anew. And you come in and there's all these fresh faces, the teachers are re-energized, the kids are excited to be back. Maybe you made a mistake last year, but you get to start new. And he was always excited in September, and he brought that excitement to the table and to the Norwalk school system, and I think it helped generate the enthusiasm that our system needed in order to succeed. The other thing that I remember Ralph for, and this is nothing he ever said to me, but I take it from my many observations of him. When folks who were in public office are asked to speak a lot, and folks who were in public office are asked to speak a lot, so many of them take the position that, all right, I got to make a speech. What am I going to say? How am I going to get through this without embarrassing myself? Jot down a few notes, etc., etc. Ralph saw every opportunity in the places where he was asked to speak publicly. He was an educational leader, and he was not going to pass up the opportunity to convey the important things that leadership in an educational community demanded. And combine that with the excitement of a new school system. I sat in on many of his convocation speeches at the beginning of the school system. I got to tell you, they were wonderful. They were true motivational speeches designed to get the educational community running and raring to go. But beyond that, he wasn't afraid of risk. He wasn't afraid to make a statement that might not sit well with everybody in the audience if it conveyed something that he felt was important to make the school system better. And he did it time and time again. I never saw him at a public event where he had been asked to speak where he didn't take that opportunity to convey something that was important. And it's one of the leadership skills that I valued most in the way he handled his job as the superintendent of schools. Ralph was the educational leader that we were looking for a long time, and happily he stayed with the Norwalk school system for a long time. I think he found a home here. I think he really liked it. I think people really liked him. And I think he was happy. When he first came in, going back to that 1983 interview, and we were talking about him, and some of the board members said, you know, he'll be a good superintendent for us, but he's going to be out of here in 4 or 5 years. He's going to New York or this, that, or the other thing. He found a home in Norwalk. He loved the Norwalk community, and the Norwalk community loved him. Ralph's legacy goes far beyond, if you'll forgive me, his mortal life. Ralph's legacy is that of helping thousands of school children, not only in Norwalk, but in the other systems and the private school that he ended up being housemaster at. He just helped kids. He loved helping kids. He loved talking to kids. And his legacy goes well beyond his lifetime. Many people are so much better off because of the leadership that Ralph provided to the Norwalk school system and to other school systems. And the school system itself is so much better off because of that. I have to tell you, is Dr. Estrella here? Hey, doctor, how are you? You know, I don't know if all of you know this. Being a superintendent, not an easy job. But Ralph handled it masterfully. And the Norwalk school system is so much better off because of his leadership. There will be people who will never know Ralph's name. Employees, students, others who participate in the Norwalk school system from the time he left until 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, who will never know Ralph Sloan's name. But they will be better off because of the mark he left in the Norwalk school system. I'm honored to have had the opportunity to speak about Ralph. I'm honored to call him a colleague. And more importantly, I'm honored to call him a friend. And I don't know who gets this next.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can I put this in here, right? Good. How's that? Good. My name is Lynn Maginnis, and I am here as a 36-year teacher at Rowayton School, but I'm really here to represent all the teachers that were in Norwalk that had the pleasure of working with Ralph Sloan. You've heard tonight how remarkable he was, but it was amazing as a teacher, and I know all of us feel that way, to have had the opportunity to work with him. I looked back, after Price contacted me, I actually looked back to see how many superintendents I had worked with over the years that I had been in Norwalk. And there were 7. And actually, I found my my old teaching contracts that I had signed, that were signed by the superintendents. And it is true, teachers save everything. I know you have your letters from Ralph, because I have mine as well as probably so many of us have these handwritten notes from Ralph Sloan. There were 7 superintendents, and as I looked at their names on my signed contracts, it's amazing. Some names were barely recognizable. Some were recognizable but unremarkable. And then there was Ralph Sloan. Just the mention of Ralph's name, and how many of us could think that we would ever call the superintendent of schools Ralph? But that's how we knew him, as Ralph. Just the mention of his name brought a warm smile to our faces all the time. Why is that? Because Ralph really believed that the teacher was the essential piece of the puzzle in Norwalk, anywhere. His philosophy was always to make teachers feel seen, heard, and respected. And Ralph practiced what he preached. I read in the paper that somebody called him the real deal. And that's the way he was. He was the real deal. He developed a personal trust in all of us. And we really felt he truly cared about what we did day in and day out. And he made it, as you've heard tonight, he made it a mission to visit all of us in our classrooms. And he also made it a mission to meet one-on-one with the entire teaching staff during his tenure in Norwalk, one-on-one in his office. And this is above and beyond all of his superintendent duties of the day. That is remarkable, really, for him to do that. That's a lot of meetings. But we just really felt that by him doing this, he really, really, truly believed in us as a staff and just wanted to get to know us better. He would attend activities in all of the schools. He would go to games and plays and projects and just sharing his support for what the teachers were doing. I often wondered how he ever had time to eat and sleep. He just was out there all the time. A little quick Ralph Sloan story. During the summer of 1986, several of us Norwalk teachers were inducted into the Connecticut Writing Project as teacher consultants, and teachers from all the surrounding towns were participating that summer and were honored at a special induction ceremony in Stamford, the University of Connecticut. And all the superintendents from all of the teachers that were participating were invited to attend our induction ceremony. And who do you think was the only superintendent there that day? Ralph Sloan. And that's a true story. So how do happy teachers and teachers who feel supported for what they do day in and day out translate into student achievement? Because that's probably kind of the buzzword, student achievement. Well, during Ralph's tenure of 15 years, student achievement grew steadily from year to year under the watchful eyes of his teaching staff of over 1,200 dedicated professionals. There was a list of items that he shared with the staff. He used to do his wonderful convocations, but he also had this list that he called his Some Laws from Experience. And this list was actually written in 1983, I believe it was dated. It had 24 items on it. And I'm sure that by the end of his tenure, the list of items of things that he's learned from experience would have been much longer. But the 3 items that really stood out to me and the rest of the teachers were, this was number 20 on the list. Don't ask for an opinion unless you're prepared to follow it. Number 21 on the list was, it's not what you do, but how you do it that counts in public organizations. And number 24 on his list was, personal trust or distrust speaks louder than program effectiveness. And I think that really sums up Ralph Sloan. Thank you from the entire teaching staff. The Sloan family, thank you for sharing Ralph with us. We're so grateful to have had the opportunity to work with him.
Sorry about that. How is everyone tonight? I'm Jack. I'm one of Ralph's 3 grandsons. I want to thank you all so much for being here tonight. On behalf of our whole family, we're incredibly grateful for your presence, your kind words, and for honoring the life of my grandfather. If he were here standing in the back right now, he'd probably chuckle and say, well, this is certainly more than I deserve. And he'd meant it. You know, he was humble like that. Sincerely touched, but you could tell he didn't need the praise to be content. He never saw himself as more important than anyone else, and that's exactly why he meant so much to so many. Throughout his life, especially during his many years in education, he had a gift for making others feel seen. Whether you were in the boardroom or the classroom, whether you had a question or simply needed to be heard, he met you with the same respect, the same steady presence. People looked up to him, but more often than not, he found a way to level the ground beneath everyone's feet. You've heard tonight about his legacy, his leadership, his advocacy, the real changes he helped shape. But what I want to share with you is what it felt like after all that, when the hard work had been done, when the titles retired, and when he turned his attention towards a different kind of joy. By the time I was born, he was nearing the end of that long, dedicated chapter. And in retirement, he stepped into a new role that he embraced fully, being a grandfather. He and my grandmother were always there, present, supportive, hands-on. I have beautiful memories of the time we spent together. When we were very little, they were always there to help my parents with 3 young boys. Me, my twin brother, and shortly after my younger brother were quite the handful at times, I'm sure. We were incredibly lucky. He had a quiet, easy joy about him in those years. He loved to cook. I mean, he really loved it. It wasn't just something he did. It was something that brought him real pleasure. He cooked thoughtfully, but with a kind of lightness. Like it was never about perfection. It was about sharing something good. Indian food in particular was his favorite. He was always experimenting, always tasting, and it's something we bonded over. My fiance and I were lucky enough to be able to cook for him not long ago, just before he passed. It's something I know he appreciated, and a moment we will remember dearly. He also loved being on the water. It didn't matter the vessel. Over the years, he owned several boats, and he was proud of every one of them, not in a showy way, but because they were a means of bringing his family together. Sailing especially gave him peace. He loved the calm rhythm of it. There's a moment when you're out in the water when it feels like time stops, when the sun is warm and the breeze is gentle on your face, when it's completely quiet except for the sound of the waves slapping the hull, or the rigging blowing in the wind. We were truly blessed to share moments like this. He was funny too, sometimes sarcastic, sometimes just plain goofy. He didn't take life too seriously, and he certainly never took himself too seriously. But his kindness was constant. He treated people with gentleness and respect, and he had a way of lifting others up, quietly, sincerely, and without ever needing credit. This gallery, filled with student artwork, made him so happy. He believed in the power of creativity to spark young minds, He knew that education wasn't just about books and tests. It was about helping people find their passion, their voice, their place in the world. He passed peacefully after a life of meaning and love and laughter. And while he accomplished so much, I'll always remember him most for the way he made people feel, seen, safe, and valued. So thank you again for being here, for honoring him, and for celebrating a life lived with humility, humor, and heart. Let's carry that spirit forward with kindness, with empathy, and with open eyes for the beauty in the world around us. Thank you.
Not sure I can follow my son. I looked up my dad's first house, and it was a row house in Philadelphia. It's available for $40,000. It's 1,000 feet, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, on a row house in North Phillip Street. You have to walk 8 blocks before you find the first tree, and he did that, like we walked through the snowstorm with bare feet. And we looked on Google Map, and the first tree near my dad's row house is 8 blocks away. So he was a little kid, an orphan. His dad had been killed in the war, and he grew up with his aunties and his grandparents from Poland. And he really believed that any kid could rise out of poverty. And he did. And I think he never forgot that for any kid he ever worked with. So thank you for being here today. And remember, those little kids, the ones who don't think that are going to make it, they can come and have the same life that my father did. And that was the most important thing to him. So thank you for coming. Please see the art, and thank you for the mayor and Laura for this